Hello, it's Joe, and as you can see from the title of this video, I'm here to talk to you about the least favourite books that I read in the year of 2018. I only have 5 books to talk about and no honourable mentions, so let's get started. Coming in at number 5 is Heretics Anonymous by Katie Henry. This book follows a boy named Michael who moves house for like the billionth time and starts a new school called St. Clair's, and the new school is very, very Catholic, and Michael is very, very atheist, so he's a bit worried that he won't fit in. However, in his first class of the new school, a girl named Lucy stands up to one of the teachers regarding a feminist issue, I think it was, and Michael thinks that he's found a fellow atheist in her. However, he's very wrong because Lucy is actually a Catholic and wants to become the first woman priest. So yeah, that throws a bit of a spanner in the works, but they end up being friends, and Lucy introduces Michael to a group called Heretics Anonymous. Heretics Anonymous is basically a group of people who are not Catholic in St. Clair's, who basically meet up and talk shit about the school and moan. That's essentially what it is. So there's Michael, who is an atheist, there's Lucy, who is a Catholic and wants to be a priest, but is also an outspoken feminist. There is Eden, who is a Celtic Reconstructionist polytheist, I believe. There is Max, who is a Unitarian who can dress however he wants. There is Avi, who is gay and Jewish, and is that everyone? I feel like that's everyone. Yes, that's everyone. So, and this was actually the only book that I read in December, which is why I didn't post a December wrap-up, because, well, I'm talking about it now, so there was no point. If you don't know, this is one of Emma from Emma Books' favourite books of last year, and she was raving about it, so of course that made me excited to read it. Unfortunately, it didn't live up to the expectations that I had for it. I went into this book thinking it would be something, and it turned out it wasn't. Basically, the truth about this book, in my opinion, is that it's a generic YA romance disguised as a book about religious beliefs. So the religious beliefs aspect of this book is like pushed forward to the synopsis, and everyone talks about, you know, that part of it. However, I feel like the main plot of this book was a generic YA romance, and that more than anything is what made me really dislike this book. I think if I'd gone into it knowing that it was very romance heavy, I would have probably enjoyed it more, but because I didn't, I was kind of shocked by it and just didn't like it at all, because I feel like the whole religious diversity aspect of it was just completely pushed to the side in favour of the romance, which I just didn't really care about at all. I feel like, to be honest, it was quite a well done romance. Like, if you're into romance, you'll probably like it. However, for me, I just didn't care whatsoever. I wanted to know more about, you know, the religious aspect of the book, and it just wasn't explored, in my opinion. I will say that this book did have some complex characters, such as Michael himself, Lucy, and Michael's dad. However, beyond that, I feel like it really didn't. The other members of the Heretics Anonymous group, for example, were, in my opinion, criminally underutilised. Like, I was expecting to see them a lot more, and I feel like I barely got to know them, apart from very, very surface level, so I really wanted to see more of them, and it was basically just focusing on Michael and Lucy, and it just did not work for me. So basically, I did not enjoy this book because of the romance. However, if you are a fan of romance, then read the book. It's really well written, I will say that. And I like how it was structured and everything, and as I say, some of the characters were complex, so it's not like a bad book in general. It's just like, for me, it just didn't do it. Coming in at number 4, I have The Toymakers by Robert Dinsdale. Before I start off, I just want to say, look at this cover, isn't it just beautiful? A really quick summary of this book would be, it's essentially the night circus, but it's a toy shop. Basically, it's about a girl named Kathy who falls pregnant at a young age and runs away from home and ends up at Papa Jack's Emporium in London, and they basically take her in and she works there, and it follows her life in the Emporium. Also, Papa Jack, who is like the head of the Emporium, he has two sons, and basically they're like competing to be Papa Jack when he dies, essentially. And again, that sounds reminiscent of the Night Circus with the whole competition aspect. So I feel like if you liked the Night Circus, you'll probably like this book. It's written really well, I will say that. The writing is really beautiful. However, the reason that it's on this list is that for me it was just so slow and so boring. It was one of those books that when I was reading it, I was kind of enjoying it because the writing was nice, but once I put it down, I had no desire to pick it back up again, if you know what I mean. So like, that wasn't great. And one thing that I hated about this book is the long chapters. I'm one of those people who loves short chapters. Like, if it's more than 15 pages in a chapter, then I'll get really bored because I don't know if anyone else is like this, but I have to finish a chapter before I put the book down. Like, I can't put my bookmark in the middle of a chapter and then put the book down and not read it till the next day. Like, I have to finish the chapter. So when the chapters were like 25 to 40 pages long, I was just not happy, and it wasn't a good time. The book wasn't all bad, I will say. Some good things about it were the setting and the atmosphere. Like the Night Circus, it created a very realistic yet magical atmosphere. I don't know if that made sense, but it did, and the Emporium felt like a place that I would want to go to. So that was cool. And I also really liked the ending of this book. I feel like it was well over halfway through when an actual plot was established, to be honest. And it's not like the characters were engaging enough to keep the story going while there was no plot. The characters were either really bland and boring or really, really annoying. Like Kathy, I feel like she was an okay main character, but essentially she was boring and didn't really care about her. And then the two brothers, I've forgot the names by now, but they were like so annoying, especially the younger brother. I think his name was Emil. I hated his character. But yeah, essentially, if you like the Night Circus, I would give this book a go. If not, then there's no point in picking it up because it's basically the same thing. Coming in at number 3, we have The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. It follows a young girl named Vasya who... Vasya? I think it's Vasya. Anyway, it follows her, and she lives in Russia a long time ago, like medieval times. I'm not sure. But she lives in Russia a long time ago, and basically she can see all these spirits that live around her house and no one else can see them. And apart from that, I really don't know how to summarize this book because, like, what was even the plot? Like, I finished this book and I still don't know what the plot was. I will say this book started off really strong. It crafted like a wintry, magical atmosphere that was really cool, and Catherine Arden's writing was really enjoyable, especially considering I'm pretty sure this is her debut novel, so like props to her for that. I personally found all the Russian names and terms very, very confusing, and I understand that there was a glossary, but I'm not the type of person who wants to be flicking back and forth to understand the book. Like, I don't want to have to refer to a glossary every single page, and I felt like that was necessary for me to understand it, so I just didn't use the glossary at all and ended up very confused. I will say I really liked Vasya as the main character. She was somewhat of a free spirit who unfortunately had been born in a time and place that didn't really want women to be free spirits. I like to think of it as she was born in a societal cage and she was constantly trying to escape. She was consistent and real, and I actually really admired her persistence in trying to escape this societal cage, and the way she was like completely herself all the time. I really admired that as well. So like, as a main character, I thought she was really good. Unfortunately, the other characters in the book, pretty much all of them, did not live up to Vasya's level whatsoever. In fact, most of them I actively hated, especially the priest, I think he was. think his name's like Constantine or something. I despised him. One thing about this book that I feel like it lacked was an inciting incident. If there was one, I completely missed it and it wasn't strong enough. Also, the sexism in this book wasn't challenged, I thought. Like, Vasya fought against the sexism for herself, but I don't think the writer made it clear that the sexism was morally wrong. Like, Vasya was going through it thinking, oh, well, I don't like that for me, but it never came across as, well, that's wrong and I'm fighting against it because it's wrong, if that makes sense. And one quote that I have actually written down that really bothered me was, can't remember who said it, I think it was Vasya's dad, who I hated as well, by the way, and he said something like, at least she was not promiscuous. So what if she was? Like, promiscuity is not a bad thing, and it wasn't. When he said that, it made it seem like promiscuity was a bad thing, and that the writer thought so as well. Maybe she doesn't, I don't know, but that's how it came across to me, and I didn't like it. The main thing that I did actually really like about this book was the utter lack of romance. There was like no romance whatsoever, and it made me really happy because I'm tired of romance in books that don't advertise it. Other than that, didn't like it. Boring, confusing, didn't like the characters. Where was the plot? Wasn't there. So yeah, unfortunately I won't be continuing with the series, which is a shame because I really like the covers for the second and third books, but oh well. Coming in at number 2, the second worst book that I read in 2018 was Running with Lions by Julian Winters. I actually won this book at a signing event in New York when I was there for BookCon. It was in Barnes & Noble, and it was like an event with Adam Silvera, Becky Albertalli and David Arnold. And Becky was basically giving away this book, and I won it. And when she told us the synopsis, I thought it sounded really good. It's essentially about a boy named Sebastian Hughes who goes to soccer camp for the summer. Basically, it's a gay romance in a summer camp, and that sounded really good to me, and I thought I'd really enjoy it. Unfortunately, I really did not enjoy this book. Before going into the reasons I didn't enjoy the book, I will say that the book is really diverse in terms of race and sexuality, so that's like a plus point for it, but other than that, I can't really name any other plus points. I think the main problem that I had with this book is that it was written in third person, and it read as if it should have been written in first person, and it was really annoying me the entire time. Like, from the first page, I was like, why is this written in third person? It needs to be written in first person, and I thought it might have switched at one point. But it just didn't, and it made the whole reading experience very difficult for me. And honestly, just the writing in general was not good. In my opinion, this book read as a first draft that has never been looked at by an editor. And I know that sounds kind of harsh, and I feel bad saying it, but that's just how it read. I seem to remember reading somewhere that Julian Winters wrote fanfiction before writing this book, and honestly, I can tell. Not that fanfiction can't be good, but this read like a fanfiction that had never been looked at before he put it out. So yeah. And one thing that I noticed was that the characters were like constantly giving the middle finger to each other. And when I say constantly, like, I mean at least twice per chapter. Like, if you have a copy of this book, even if you haven't read it yet, just flick through it and see how many times, just by skimming it, you can find someone flipping the bird or like giving the middle finger. Like, it's all the time, and once I noticed it, like, I just couldn't stop, and it got really, really repetitive and annoying. Also, this book barely had a plot, in my opinion, apart from the romance between Sebastian and Emilia, which I guess is the plot of the book. So essentially, it's a character-driven book, and unfortunately, the characters were all shit. Like, they were really, really one-dimensional and lacked any development whatsoever. Like, there was, like, stereotypes not stereotypes, but each character sort of had a trait, and that was like their only trait, if you know what I mean. I really think this book needed some sort of subplot, or like 3 subplots to keep it interesting, but it was essentially just the one romance, and that was kind of it. And it didn't flow well, the structure was all over the place, just not great. Also, the constant switching of the first names and the surnames was so confusing. Like, we'd start calling Sebastian Hughes, and then we'd call other characters by their surnames, but then in the next scene call them by their first names, and then it kept switching around like that to the point where I didn't really know who was who. Basically, this book was written like the first draft of a fanfiction, which is a shame because I think the concept was really interesting and could have been done really well in another person's hands. And my least favourite book of 2018, my number 1, is The Death Cure by James Dashner. Basically, this is the 3rd book in the Maze Runner trilogy, which you've probably all heard of, but if you haven't, it follows a boy named Thomas who wakes up in a maze with a load of other boys, and it's a dangerous maze, and they have to just live there and try and escape, essentially. And I actually really enjoyed the first book. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about the second or the third. Really hated them. Once I'd read The Scorch Trials, which is the second book, and really disliked it, I was hoping that this book would like come through and save the trilogy, but unfortunately it didn't, and it ended up being the worst one. The main issue that I had with this book was there were so many unanswered questions. Like, the trilogy as a whole puts forward a lot of like things that make you, you know, oh, why is that happening, and why are they doing that, and what's going on there, and you feel like it'll be answered later on, but it's not. They just never bother to answer any questions that are put forward. Like, it's just a constant stream of me asking questions while reading and none of them ever getting answered, and it just really, really annoyed me. Also, there are so many characters in this series that were just completely useless and served no purpose whatsoever. Like, I can't even name them, to be honest, but the cast of this book is absolutely massive, and most of them could have been scrapped or not even named and it would have been fine. Also, my 2 favourite characters, Newt and Minho, were completely butchered in this book. I really liked Minho, especially in the first book, and I really liked him in the second book as well, but unfortunately even he did not survive the monstrosity that is this book. And from being my favourite character, I feel like Minho was reduced to an overly aggressive, whiny lapdog who was so far up Thomas's arse that he could probably punch people out of his mouth. Teresa and Brenda, who were the female leads of the series, were basically the same character, and there was no point in them being separate characters, especially in this book, and neither of them were interesting at that. And no spoilers, but there are like a lot of deaths in this book. It's called The Death Cure, and none of them had any point whatsoever to the story. Like, no one who died for any kind of reason. Like, I feel like deaths in books, there needs to be a reason, whether it motivates the character or drives the plot or anything like that, and it just didn't do anything. Like, people died and it was just like, oh, they're dead. One good thing that I will say is that the film adaptations of this trilogy are really, really good. So honestly, if you're thinking of picking up this series, maybe, you know, if it sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and read it. But personally, I wouldn't bother and would just watch the films instead. So those were all of my least favourite books of 2018. Let me know what your least favourite books that you read last year were in the comments below. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you feel like you'll like more of my videos, then subscribe below. All my social media links will be in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day. Goodbye.